What are you waiting for, mate?
I was trying to stop blinking, and then that became funny. Hello there.
Hi. On October the 5th, Ryan and I went to the FRA Beetleweight Championships in Marlow, and we took our Beetleweight. Hello there.
This was kind of our first normal competition, I want to say. We've done Bogglebots, which is a very different experience. That is a production, and it is very focused on that. We've done Robo Nerd, which is very casual. So this was our first real experience of how a typical competition runs. I think it's fair to say we absolutely loved it.
Yeah, we both had a lot of fun trying to keep up with the relentless pace of that, of just how quickly the fights go through and how little time you've got to work on your robot between your fights as well. It's mayhem. So the format of this tournament was basically that in the first round of fights was a bunch of three-way melees. The winner of each melee would go into the next round, and the two losers, I guess, of that melee would go into this redemption four-way rumble thing. So our first fight was a three-way melee.
Yeah, our opponents for that fight were Let the Good Times Roll, a very potent drum spinner, and Good Boy, which is just the most ridiculously tanky two-wheel drive wedge you could possibly imagine. You might be familiar with them from Series 1 of Bogglebots. Since then, the design has kind of changed, and they've got, I think it was about 40mm of HDPE on the front as a wedge.
Yep.
So definitely something that could take the hits. That left us with a bit of a decision to make competitively. Did we run our nice little forks and try and get under Good Boy, or did we run the nice big tanky wedge to make sure we could survive the spinner hits?
So my thinking here was that I think I'm incapable of holding back and driving tactically. I'm very much a drive my face into the opponent kind of a driver, and that kind of made the decision for us, and we went with the wedge on the front of our robot. Right, so what we'll do is we'll put a clip in of the fight now. I don't think we'll show the entire fight, but if you want to see the entire fight, we've got videos of that on our channel as well. There'll be links in the description. But yeah, we'll show we'll show a portion of the fight, and then afterwards we'll talk about what happened in that fight.
Do it. Don't give him your rear. More, Sam, more! That's what we're here for!
Yes! It's self-right!
It always did! This is fine. Yeah, hit wouldn't be a bad idea, mate. Oh, if Shane had been faster there. The hammer has slow. That's fine. Just reverse it, please. Woo! We're halfway there. Living on a prayer. Try and get him to hit the hammer back over for us, then we'll have self-rightness. That'll do. Now we can hopefully self-right again. No, you've just lost a belt. You should still have drive. Just stay alive, mate. Might even get it on aggression, you never know. I mean, it doesn't look great. As I'm sure you could tell from the commentary through that whole fight, we were having a ton of fun. It did go the full 3 minutes. We didn't get the decision, but I think we really managed to show so many of the things that this robot is about.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the fight, I attempted to hold back, tried to avoid taking that first hit, but I got bored, basically, and put the face of this robot straight into the drum spinner, and I think really demonstrated one of the great strengths of having a very steep plastic wedge at the front of your robot. It gives us a lot of defense, but it's also a really good bite point for our opponent, which sounds like an odd thing to want to do, but it does mean that we get sent flying, and assuming we can build a robot that can survive that, it makes for a very entertaining fight for both us and the audience.
Generally speaking, I think we all enjoy seeing damaging fights, and as a hammer, especially the way we've built the hammer, we're not delivering that damage, but we can be the people taking it. And we also seem to have a few other crowd-pleasing moves. Self-righting seems really popular. You were particularly happy about it.
Oh, yes.
And we had a lovely moment that unfortunately I failed to capture very well, where we did get both the other robots in the corner and really started pummeling them. Then we got tactical, though. And that, again, isn't really us, and we did go for the pit. I just want to clarify, in the video, I complained about Shane not getting the pit fast enough. He was as quick as he could be. That thing, I believe, is usually automated.
Yeah.
And in this case, they'd had some issues. He was having to pull a cord. He was as fast as he could be on that.
The other thing as well is that at the time I hit the button, both our opponents were on the pit. And if it had opened immediately, that would have been... On the one hand, I'm conflicted. On the one hand, it would be nice to have a win, but on the other hand, it would be a really rubbish end to that fight.
I think we're kind of vindicated as well, in that the rest of the fight was really entertaining. And if it had been pitted there, we would have lost out on that entertainment.
Yeah, we went on to take a lot more hits in that fight. Eventually, our weapon broke and the drive on one side broke. And that sort of led us down a rather, I don't know, boring end to the fight that we've cut in this video, but you can see the whole thing in another video. And where we couldn't win that pushing match, which was a shame. It's because we ended up with, because of the way our four-wheel drive works, one of these belts got broken, and it meant that whenever the front right wheel was lifted slightly, we only had drive on one side of the robot. I think in hindsight, if I had reversed and driven backwards, we would have done better at keeping both driven wheels in contact with the floor. You live and learn. But yeah, it was a bit of a pushing match towards the end, which we unfortunately lost.
So to give you a quick overview of the damage, there were lots of individual things damaged, but nothing that was too severe. So the wedge had really been chewed up, the mounting bolts were bent but functional, and the holes in the chassis that it mounts to were probably a little bit larger than when we started. The hammer itself physically was a bit more chewed up than it was before. That bent back just fine. The servo, however, was toast. We were running it on much higher voltage, and we've been running it quite a lot during testing, and it just died at some point in the fight. The drive damage we took, that bent the rear axle, it broke a drive belt, and we also had some issues with the bolts that mount the pulleys to the wheel. The base plate also took some damage. Unfortunately, that damage was right around where the battery is mounted. The battery at the end of the fight was just hanging on by some foam tape, so that also needed replacing.
So I think we took a somewhat divide and conquer kind of approach to doing that. I think, Ryan, you went off and rebuilt a base plate for us. And while Ryan was doing that, I had to replace the servo, which in a well-designed robot is a fairly quick thing to do. But the way this robot is put together means that to replace the servo that's under here, we needed to take this entire side of the robot off, which involves taking the wheels off. And to take the wheels off, you need to take the pulleys off. So you have to take this, disassemble everything on the left-hand side of the robot to get to the servo to replace it. And that is that's a time-consuming thing to have to do, which wasn't very fun.
The way the tournament was structured, we were guaranteed half an hour of repair time. Obviously, it could be longer depending on how things went. Just getting that servo replaced and getting everything assembled again was at least 45 minutes. We were kind of lucky in a way that there was a lipo fire in one of the fights in that round, which delayed proceedings. Also, when the draw came out for our round, we were drawn quite late in it. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure we would have got back in the arena. We definitely wouldn't have got back in the arena with a hammer. We might have been a four-wheel drive wedge, but that would have been it. We were very tight on time. Defeat in our opening round meant that we went into another rumble, this time a four-way fight, with Good Boy again, George Wedgington, and Bone Crusher. Now, we love fighting spinners. Fighting spinners is a lot of fun, but it was quite a relief after all those repairs to know that we were going in with a group of wedges.
Yeah, so without spinners to contend with, we have a bit more, room for tactical setups, really. And we decided to try and really capitalise on the fact that we are a four-wheel drive robot. We wanted to make sure we could push everyone around as best we could. So we went with our ground-scraping forks which also gave us the weight for a little mini bot in there as well to just go and interfere with people and annoy everyone. So we'll show you that fight. We might cut it again, you never know, and then we'll come back and talk about what happened.
Yeah, I'm going to get
That
stuck.
is not a good scene.
I'm going to get stuck. Like, I think we should have gone with the
You're
wedge.
going to have to be cautious. You bully.
Oh, it's like a bloody flipper again.
Oh no. I mean, I could activate it, but... Yes. Try and ramp off with me if you can.
Like,
Wait to pull that.
yeah.
Reverse.
I'm doing everything I can,
Okay.
mate.
I'm just not seeing any movement. I mean, I can activate the pit for us, but
Get out of the way of it.
that helps at all.
Closer to me.
Oh, now I'm stuck as well. Sam, how did you do that?
So I'm a genius. Oh, was I counting out?
Oh, we'll count down.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear that. Oh well.
So as soon as I put the robot in the arena and then tried to drive into the corner, we got a bit caught up on the floor, and at that moment I just knew immediately that the forks were a bad idea, that it was not worth the cost of having them in there. And what was it, like 16 seconds in or something, or 14 seconds?
I timed it at 13.
13 seconds in, the inevitable happened, and I got stuck on the pit, which was deeply upsetting.
So the way the pit rules work in this tournament, and I think most Beetleweight tournaments in the UK, is that the pit can't be activated until 30 seconds into the fight. I want to give massive thanks to Sov with Bone Crusher. He was frantically hitting that pit button. I'm going to claim he was trying to free us. He might have been trying to pit us, but there's a reason he won the Sportsmanship Award at this tournament. He did his best and kept hitting it. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite soon enough for us, and we were counted out. We didn't know we'd been counted out. We didn't really hear it, and in the heat of battle, it's so hard to keep up with this kind of stuff. We were there for ages. We knew we'd been there for ages, but that didn't mean we knew it had been long enough, if that makes sense. Typically, that's something that I, as the person who isn't driving, would keep track of, but I was just as distracted trying to get us free as you were. That does mean that we got your glorious pit escape, which was, I think, one of the highlights of the day, but I'm completely biased. And then, irony of ironies, we then went after Bone Crusher when we shouldn't have, and were very quickly told that we'd been counted out, parked at the side, and everything was fine for there.
Yeah, so that count out, man, because I was so focused. So I knew what I was going to try and do as soon as that pit opened. I was waiting for the pit to start opening, ready to just go full reverse on the robot, hoping that would get us through. So I was just so focused on that. There was no part of my brain that was going, we're being counted out, we've been counted. Just didn't even cross my mind. I had no idea until the judge shouted. And then stopped immediately. Yeah. It was a fight that I was upset about afterwards, because it was so obvious as we put the robot in, which is too late to do anything about it. But that's the thing that got me, was like, I knew as soon as we put it in that we were not going to do well, and it was, I don't know, just upsetting.
Yeah. It's a fight that we can learn a lot from. First of all, we've learned a lot about how our forks should be designed, and we already know how we will address that, whether it's with a sort of update to Hello There or a new robot. It's also just a lesson in, how can I put this? It's a lesson in being arena side almost, and just understanding that the pressure changes everything. You don't necessarily think straight, you don't necessarily realise what's happening around you.
Yeah. So after that disaster with the pit, we went back and removed our forks. We've melted them down, turned them into some tin cans for testing on in future, and we put our wedge back on. And with all our repairs done, we set ourselves up some whiteboards.
Whiteboards are a glorious thing. We kind of went in expecting to be involved in a few whiteboards. We had a few targets in mind, and as soon as Shane gave us permission to start organising fights, we made a beeline for Crabsloopy Clawful, who we really wanted to have a good smash on. We then kind of turned that into a big non-spinner rumble, and you'll have to forgive me for reading the names because there were a lot of robots in there. So we had Hello There, Attitude Adjuster, Wedgie Boy, Sir Lancer Frog, CR360, Crabsloopy Clawful, and finally Mr. Cat's Mouse House. Okay, we've activated.
Oh, we've lost the belt. We've lost drive.
Of course we have.
No, never enough. More active. Hey! Hey! What are you? Give me! What?
No, where was the violence end? Remember, the weapon servo's going to get hot, Sam.
Yeah, I'm doing my best.
Oh, that is a proper meaty thud.
It's in the pit. I must go down there. The kitchen implements talk to me. There's a pit, now there's a house. That's one of my good boxes.
Whoa, bold move. Bold strategy.
We've got a professional over here.
Dude. Oh.
Sam!
Oh, great timing. I don't know what to do that.
I think overall, for quite a hurriedly arranged little whiteboard, that was a lot of fun. And it's kind of highlighted some of the big strengths and big weaknesses of the robot. I think the most obvious weakness in that fight is the fact that we managed to shed a drive belt without even being touched. So that amazingly was on the side that hadn't got damaged previously. I think that was just a question of quite a hurried reassembly after the first fight. The drive belts being on the outside was not part of the original plan for this robot. This robot was planned to have wheel guards, but I think mostly as a result of our persistence that we were going to have a mini-bot, have to wait for a mini-bot, we never really built those wheel guards. And for the most part, it's fine. It's just, I think, our mistake really in reassembly that made that happen.
Yeah, these belts are held on by an artifact of making these pulleys with a hole saw, so there's not a lot of flange holding them in place. It's amazing they work at all, really. The fun challenge of these sort of like having lots of robots in the arena is knowing who to attack and when, and like keeping track of everything and following what's going on. And what inevitably happens is I end up focusing on like 2 or 3 robots that I can easily find and just go for, and not even aware of what else happens in the fight. Like I didn't realise that Mr. Cat's Mouse House was in the pit at any point. Like I just sort of like completely passed me by. So that's always a challenge with all these things. But it's really good fun being able to sort of to jump between different opponents and just, you know, mercilessly tap as many opponents as possible.
You definitely fixated on Crabsloopy Clawful at one point. It's such an inviting flat target, but it's also a really effective little control bot.
Yeah.
Their grabbers, when they sort of got into our wheels, really gave us some trouble. And there was also Attitude Adjuster, who I think we couldn't resist a little bit of hammer versus hammer. We also spent quite a long time after the fight just chatting to them and getting some advice really on how to build a brushless hammer on another robot.
Yeah.
Our hammer is powered by a servo, and as you could hear from some of our commentary, that's something we were quite concerned about. The reason for that is that for this competition, we decided to up the power to the servo. It's now running on the full battery voltage, which is around 12 volts. It's rated for 6, and that means that it builds up a lot of heat very quickly. And we really don't know how much it can take. So we kind of had to be cautious about how much we were using it. You also had another worry with the weapon halfway through the fight.
Yeah, so there's two issues with having the massive voltage in there. One of them is just repeated usage. Even if you're just flailing backwards and forwards, if you do that enough, the servo gets really hot, and that's concerning. The other one though is the way that the transmitter's set up means that I've not got positional control over the axe. It's just a switch thing basically. It's just a min-max curve, which means I barely have to move the stick to make the axe fire, which is nice. But it means that if I'm in a position where the axe can't go to full extension one way or the other, it's putting a lot of stress on the servo. So we were pinned at some point by attitude adjuster, I think, against the wall, and I couldn't fire the axe properly forwards because another robot was in the way, and I couldn't go fully backwards because the wall was there. And that was, I was pretty convinced that we were going to lose the servo at that moment. Thankfully we didn't, but yeah, it is a concern. So I think for next time, either not a min-max curve on a servo, or don't use a servo for a hammer.
Our second whiteboard of the day was a sort of all podcast rumble. Ourselves versus ESC versus Shuntcast. And appropriately, this was arranged entirely digitally via Facebook Messenger. We literally did this from our seats as we were watching other fights. So we're up against Puns and Roses, which is a incredibly durable wedge. And also Splody Boy. Now, Splody Boy wasn't part of the main competition. It was brought along purely for whiteboards, and it's an absolutely vicious undercutter.
Stand by. 3, 2, 1, activate.
Flailing is the correct response. Are we okay? Oh, okay. That's the driven one.
Bring it, bring it! Bring it!
I mean, you're making us look almost mobile. Use the armor, Sarah. Go on, get right into that weapon. Do it. That's the way.
Still work, still work. There we go. We're still good.
We've still got some wheels left. It's fine.
How many wheels have we got left? We got 3.
We got one driven wheel left.
One driven wheel left now.
I'm not sure it's touching the floor. Are we done?
Some serious armour on the front of this one, by the way. Definitely got skeleton. No drive. Slowly Bottles finally shed all of its drive belts. I don't think there's any left in there. Have you run out of drive now?
We have precisely 0 drive now.
We're done. So you're literally parked. Oh no, we can't even. No, we're done. Can't even park. I think we can still know. Right, the pit's open now, so now it's a pit dance between Splody Bolt with no weapon and a wedge that has been driven incredibly well the whole time, carefully staying out of the battles in only to be in.
We three-wheeled suspiciously now.
And now it's the dicing with death.
Yeah, we're knackered.
Taking the moment.
So the opening of this fight, I think, demonstrates how hard a good box rush is. You can see I attempt to drive in a dead straight line to Splody Boy and then veer off to the left. It's not an intentional decision. The robot just went left and it was really annoying. Yeah, I don't know if I guess I lost traction on one side going over a ridge on the pit floor or something. But yeah, box rushes are surprisingly hard to do.
Fortunately, Puns and Roses managed a slightly better one. And the first hit that basically cripples us for the whole fight is unbelievable. I've gone through this time and time again. We've had a couple of angles to look at it, and I still don't understand how they took that wheel off. My assumption is that the hit on the front of Puns and Roses sent Splody Boy up in the air. Maybe they've come down on top of the wheel, I'm not sure, but the whole wheel just exploded. The pulley was fine. That's the weird thing, the pulley was untouched, and the whole plastic hub of the wheel was just completely removed from the aluminium hub that's on the motor. Even the circlip that retains the wheel was still in place. An absolutely crazy hit.
Yeah, and it took us ages to figure out, or it took me anyway, ages to figure out that I'd lost a wheel. Like, you can see in the video, the first time that it's visible on camera, like the bare hub is visible on camera, is about when I figured out what happened, because that's when I saw it. I was like, I've lost drive. I sort of assumed that the motor had broken or something, and then it was like, oh, that's why it's broken.
And the other thing that was confusing was that you were still able to drive. We kind of assumed that losing that wheel would mean we'd be going around in circles the whole fight, but fortunately, the way the robot's designed, because the other wheel that was remaining on that side was freewheeling, we were able to go in kind of a straight line. I think you were just being very gentle on the throttle, and that stopped us veering around. We were still able to look quite involved in the fight. And with it being a whiteboard, of course, everyone else was happy to keep hitting us. Unfortunately, mostly due to being pushed around by Puns and Roses, you managed to get in position to still get a few good hammer blows in. And one of those was particularly brutal for us.
Oh man, yeah. Our hammer got sent flying back with a lot of force. And you can see, I think you can possibly see here as well, how bent this section here became. And it was properly bent just here, that jammed the back of the pointy bit at the back of the hammer that we've since filed off. Jammed into the back of our robot, and we got one more actuation out of it, and then it's the retraction there that jammed it in place, and it didn't move again.
And that all led to a bit of a perfect storm of confusion over us being immobile, because it seemed like the robot had just stopped responding completely. We assumed that something internally had died and had taken everything with it. When we got back to the pits, we powered it up again and everything seemed to be working. We were completely confused. I think it was the next day you pieced together what had happened. So it turned out that as you were trying to drive, everything was responding. The right side had no wheel on it, so that was spinning and doing nothing. The left drive motor was spinning, but the gearbox had been annihilated. None of that motion was getting through whatsoever, and the hammer was pinned back against the back of the robot. So everything we did seemed to be doing nothing because of those really strange bits of damage. It's some of the most beautiful damage I think we could possibly have taken, really.
Yeah.
We still don't completely understand how it happened, but we were very glad to take it.
Yeah, that was a crazy fight, really good fun, and yeah, a crazy way to finish that, for our robot to end, I guess, in that fight. Madness.
And amazingly repairable as well, considering we had a fight earlier in the day that went 3 minutes that we could barely get repaired from. The fixes we actually had to make were quite simple. It was a straight swap of a motor, it was a new wheel, it was some filing of the hammer, and we were good to go into the Gladiator.
This was right at the end of the day, actually, and it took a bit of soul searching and convincing from some other people in the pits that it was worth the effort to replace the motor and stuff like that. We were both knackered at it, or I was certainly knackered and couldn't really face, because again, you've got to take the entire robot apart to replace anything in it. It's a nightmare. And I did eventually find it in myself to quietly just sit somewhere and just replace that motor, and I'm very glad we did.
I, meanwhile, went and watched fights because apparently I'm not as committed. So with some comparatively brief repairs done, we went into the final whiteboard of the day, which was the Gladiator. This was our first taste of a Gladiator, and here's how it went.
3, 2, 1, activate.
bet that's our hammer dead.
Yeah, there's not a lot of robots left, is there really? Pit's open now, that makes it a bit more interesting.
No, Sam.
Hello there. Hello?
Well, we're done.
There's an evil spinner in there.
Sweet Jin, you're out.
Yeah. Sujin makes some things win off the two this time.
Close 2, you're out of here.
So there's three robots left now, I think. Is that right? Three robots left.
Yep.
Or 2.5 by looks at the moment, really. So Lancer Frog, that's it, it's getting it down to 2. So now it's Lancer Frog versus the Spinner of Death.
On it.
Wow.
So I said this was our first taste of a gladiator, and by all accounts it was quite a strange one. Most people going in expect a gladiator to be quite a long fight, a war of attrition, and this was over within the normal 3 minutes.
Yeah, it was a crazy fight going in, and I feel like I had a lot of inner conflict with this fight. There's a part of me that wants to just go face first into all the spinners because it's funny. It's really hard to get to the spinners when there's this many robots in the arena. It's not easy to navigate everyone without being sidetracked along the way. And but the other thing as well, there's a part of me that was sort of thinking if I try and sort of look active on the outskirts but don't get too involved with the spinners, maybe everyone can sort of take each other out and we'd stand a chance of winning this. Now all those hopes were immediately dashed when our hammer broke.
And it wasn't for the same reason as before. We're not entirely sure what happened with it. We know that when we got it back, some of the linkage was broken, but we think that happened afterwards. My assumption is simply that there was too much slack in the system and it slipped. We knew going in that there was slack. The big hit that we took from Splody Boy had created some of that. We didn't really have the energy to fully hook it up again, and once it's slack, there are ways of tightening it, but it's difficult. And we felt that going into this, it worked. We didn't want to go test it too extensively in case it no longer worked. So we just went in and what happened, happened. Without the hammer, we're still a good wedge. The only issue is that we lose our ability to self-right. And that naturally is then what cost us.
Yeah, I had no idea that there was still a spinner in at that point.
I did a good job of hanging back. You were talking about doing it yourself. Especially at the end when there's 3 left. There's Let the Good Times Roll. There's 360, can't remember the rest of the name, very bad of me. And there's Sir Lancer Frog. And Let the Good Times Roll just sits back and lets them deal with each other and then goes in for that stunning final hit.
Yeah, that was insane to see firsthand as well. Just sort of like what the hell happened there, and then piecing it together after. Oh, it was so crazy, and the huge like sound of shock from everyone behind the arena who was driving as well. Like whoa! Everyone having their minds blown at the same time. It was very funny.
With the Gladiator done, that is the end of the tournament for Hello There, and realistically, the end of competition, or at least full combat competition for Hello There. It served us incredibly well. We built it to survive a weekend, essentially. It's done so much more, given us so much fun, and also allowed us to learn so much about the things we need to do to build a better robot. And that's exactly what we're planning to do. Hello There is going to be replaced by a robot called Your Move. We'll leave it up to you to work out the derivation of that name. Good luck. It will be another hammer. It will be pink. But we've got a very specific set of design goals in mind.
Yeah, the main goal with all of our robots, I think, is to try and build an entertaining robot first. And so to that end, our plans for your move are going to be to build it out of plastic and reasonably cheaply. We never want to turn down a fight for fear of damage to our robot, which means that we need to be able to economically replace anything in there. So we're going to stick with brushed motors because they're cheap, and we're going to stick with plastic because it's cheap and easy to work with. We have ideas for lots of front ends. We want to get better forks. We're going to try and do forks right. Which we're a bit nervous about, but we want those for fights where we're not fighting spinners. We want to be able to make the maximum use of our hammer and be able to get under our opponents. I think we're going to keep a needlessly steep plastic front end. I think there's a lot of value in having in being thrown around. So if we're fighting a vertical spinner or a drum, we'll have a plastic steep front end so that people get good bites into us and send us flying. And a metal front end as well.
Yes. Again, we can get sent flying, but in the case of horizontals, I think we have to send them flying. That's going to be the way. So that'll be the one concession to metal on the whole robot. Drive has always been very important to this robot, but the system, as we've discussed already, isn't the best way to do four-wheel drive. The plan is just to go 4 motors, much simpler, much more effective. We do want a little more from the hammer.
Yeah.
The hammer is funny, but it would be nice if it was also something that does a bit of damage. So we're looking into ways of doing a brushless hammer mechanism, which will be more powerful and also more reliable because it won't be reliant largely on fishing line.
We reserve the right to use a brushed motor for the hammer if it's cheaper.
You've got to have your priorities straight here.
Don't expect any brushless, but if there is brushless, it'll be in the weapon.
No, control of a brush is just easier. Trust me. So that's what you can expect from us, but as we've already said, first you can enjoy watching this thing in Bubblebots. Coming soon-ish.
When Bubblebots?
No! Cut!